As the lead guitarist for the Tragically Hip, Rob Baker has played stages across the globe, sold millions of records, and firmly earned a spot amongst Canadian rock royalty. But his work goes beyond just the hip. Rob Baker has collaborated with a number of artists over the years, as both a musician and as a visual artist. He's one half of Strippers Union, a band he formed in 2004 with odd singer and guitarist Craig Northey. And recently, he recorded guitars for Toronto country singer-songwriter Justin Rutledge. But he's always stayed involved in the Kingston scene. Over the last few years, he's worked with Miss Emily and performed on her 2017 album In Between. And he's also produced records for both Casador and The Wilderness. But Baker is back in songwriting mode. He joins us to talk about The Undertaking, the long-awaited third record from Strippers Union, on this edition of Kingston Live. Hello, I'm Johnny San.
I'm Riley Jabor.
And Rob Baker is with us.
Yes, I am. How delightful.
It's delightful you were able to join us. Thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, I like to ask everybody these days how you've been dealing with COVID. I know everybody's experience has been different the last year.
Yeah, I would never make light of it. I know a lot of people are having a really hard time, a lot of business. I have a lot of friends in business who are really struggling right now. For me, I have a home studio, a recording studio, a home studio on my top floor where I paint. And my son has been hunkered down with us for 11 months. Life is pretty good. I've got my adult son living with us, and all the things that I love to do are right here. So I'm okay.
Good. Actually, we've had Boris on the podcast before. How's he been doing?
It's good. I really feel badly for his generation, kids his age. You know, he was just, they were just getting the band established. They were almost halfway through a 3-month tour when they had to pull the plug. And all their money dates were in the second half of the tour. So that hurt. But, you know, they're trying to establish themselves. He's got his graduate degree and trying to get the band up and running. And now the whole world's just on hold for them. And it's tough to watch. But he's doing as well as he could be doing, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to have him home. So he and I work out in my studio here 1 or 2 days a week, songwriting and recording together, which has really been a gift.
Nice. And of course, you made an album.
I did. I just plug away. It's part of what I do. I guess it's part of who I am. I just come down here and work out, chase ideas down musically. And if it leads me to the piano behind me or to the stand-up bass or whatever it is, I just love to chase a musical idea down. And some of these things turn into pretty good little musical demos. And music is meant to be shared. So at a certain point, I started sending these things to Craig. And he would just cherry pick through. I'd send him, 6 or 8, and he'd write lyrics, or pick 2 or 3 that he wanted to write lyrics for. And we'd start that process.
Was that a particularly large undertaking, narrowing it down? Because you had more than 50 demos written for this record, right?
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking of it as a record. I just come down here on a daily basis and work. I just apply myself like any craftsman would do. It's my craft. So I just keep plugging away at it, and you start building up this stuff. And when I was in the hip, I did the same thing, but, I would have 15, 20 songs a year. And the hip would be putting out a record. Well, you might, if you're lucky, you get 2 songs on the record because everyone was a songwriter. So I get these backlog of material, and it starts to play with your mind. After a while, you start repeating ideas and whatever, mining your old songs for ideas. So I did the first Strippers Union album as a way of, it was kind of like a creative enema to just clear the pipes. And then that was followed by a second enema called The Deuce. And
pun intended.
Yeah. And so this time it's been 10 years. It's no surprise that there were like 50 or 60 songs that I thought might be appropriate for Craig. We settled on the 18 in question, but I haven't stopped writing. Even when we were mixing, I would come down here and I'd be writing. So I've still got a lot of things in the pipe.
I'm going to have to ask you the same thing I think I've asked every artist for the last year about the timing of the album. Like, did COVID have an effect on this? Like, or would you have released this if we weren't in a pandemic?
Oh, I would have released it anyways, I think. But it's been a long time coming, and we were building to the point. We had the 18 songs, and just before the lockdown happened, I made the call that rather than me playing bass and drums on everything, I had it sort of like a Todd Rundgren or a Prince album where I played everything. Craig did most of the singing and most of the lyrics, but everything else was me. And I thought, well, there are a couple songs that would really benefit from live bass and drums. And Pat and Doug played on the first two albums, and they're brothers from other mothers as well. So I packed up my hard drive and hopped on a plane and went to Vancouver, and they knocked out 17 songs in 3 days.
Jeez.
And I hopped back on the plane, and the day after I got home was the first case in Kingston. There were 2 RMC guys on that same flight that I was on who were positive.
Oh, geez.
And I just hunkered down and been doing the same ever since. After a couple weeks of being hunkered down, kind of quarantined at home. The band studio was also under quarantine. So after he'd been under quarantine, our house engineer for 2 weeks, and I'd been under quarantine, I said, let's mix this. And I headed out there, and we just did a mass sort of a mixing marathon and mixed the record. And so in a sense, the COVID lockdown gave me the time to finish everything up. And then I found myself still more time on my hands, as we all have these days. So I started doing the art. I love the old blues singles from Paramount, blues singles from the 1930s, where every single had an illustration. I don't know if you're familiar with these. Mm-hmm. And then I think a lot of that was a big influence on R. Crumb, who I also really liked. So I just thought, I'm going to do an illustration for every song and see where that leads. And that became the album package. So all this time provided to me. Again, I don't want to make light of it, but, you know, you can sit around and mope, you can gain 20 pounds, you can watch Netflix all the time, or you can learn Italian. You know, you can put it to use.
Or all of those things.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the album art, too. What's up with the raccoons?
Well, in talking about the song we wanted, or the lyrics we wanted to write for that piece of music, we were talking about urban wildlife and how raccoons and rats and squirrels and crows, foxes, coyotes, they're not really part of this system, but they've found a way to make it work for them. It's a system designed for someone else, but they carry on and find a way. And I think that most people are the same way. They feel like this system wasn't designed for me. It was designed for someone else, by someone else. But we go about our business and we live in our own little silos, not realizing how much power we actually have collectively. But the raccoons, I don't know. I feel like a raccoon sometimes. A trash panda.
I feel like that's especially relevant in these, I hate to use the term, but these unprecedented times, these COVID times, where if we were adjusted to even those weird ways we find ourselves stuck in those daily ruts, we kind of had to adapt ourselves to this new world where we're spending so much time isolated, so much time away from the routines that we had found for ourselves, where we were adapting. I feel like that's a whole other level that it relates in a new way to look at it.
Yeah. If you look at those raccoons in the illustration, there's a whole spectrum of attitudes. Some of them take it quite nicely. They're quite happy carrying on about their business, flashing a peace sign. Some of them are pretty feral. So it's kind of how we all respond on some level, I think.
I feel like I have a newfound respect for raccoons.
I'm always fascinated by the relationship between musicians and visual artists, and artists who do both, who do, like you, the illustrations for the art and the actual musicianship for the single. Is there, when you're writing the song and you're coming up with these similarities, these parallels between the wildlife and the themes in some of these, is that an idea that presented itself independently for each piece?
No, it presented itself for the song. These things usually, our song lyrics grow out of conversations which often are not related to writing a song. I use the example, I titled a piece of music Harmonic Minor, because it was all based on harmonic minor scales and harmonic minor theory, whatever. So I sent that off to Craig, and Craig wrote a song about a miner trapped underground with a harmonica. That's from the very first Strippers Union album. But that's like, it's kind of just the way we work. So for this record, he had a day off in Toronto at Bruce McCullough's house. He was spending the night there. And I couldn't get him down to Kingston, so I hopped on a train with my computer and went up there. And as we always do, we poured a couple cups of coffee and sat down and started talking about our lives, our dogs, music. And we got deep into it, talking about our dogs, which led to talking about Ricky Gervais' most recent TV series, Afterlife, and how the dog saves his life. And then I told him a story about how I'd met an Afghan vet on Princess Street during the Princess Street summer when they closed the street off. And this guy had a companion dog that the government got for him. And we just got into this conversation about it. And we said, okay, well, let's write a song from the point of view of a companion dog. And his human has just returned from being away for a long time. And he's come back, but he's not the same guy. Something's changed about him. And you just, it's a conversation that spun itself out. And we said, okay, we got a concept. Let's go. Just start hammering it out. And he does the heavy lifting. He uses the paint roller, and I have the little brush for the details. It's all about trying to make each other laugh.
Well, I wanted to ask about that too, because someone like yourself, I'm sure you could work with whoever you wanted, but based on what we know of your career, you seem to work with people that you have a connection with. I know I saw your interview with Bill Welichka last week, and you were talking about how you and Craig in the early 90s just hit it off, and you and the Hip bandmates were always close, and Boris is in the new video, that sort of thing. Is that important to you, having that personal connection? It
is. I've never thought of music as a job. There were job or work aspects that surrounded it, like the living in hotels and being on the road, away from family, all that stuff. It was 33 years of being in a band, and as Charlie Watts said, 50 years in the Stones, he said it was like 45 years of sitting around waiting. It's kind of what it is. And that's what I feel like I got paid for. Getting up on stage and playing with your friends, people that you love, is a privilege. I don't want to say it too loud, but I feel like I should be the one paying for the privilege of that. So, I couldn't see myself doing it for a paycheck. Like, it's nice to get a paycheck, don't get me wrong. I'm all about that. Love those. But that's never been why we did anything we did.
Yeah, it's that personal gratification.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Miss Emily is on this album, and Spencer Evans is on here as well.
Yep. I Emily's great. She was on the second album as well. She sang on a couple tracks on the second album. And this time I just thought, we stripped away the horn sections and strings and things from previous records and made it a much more organic, small affair, I guess. And I just thought it would be great to have Emily in there.
Well, Kingston is so well represented on that album with those musicians that you've worked with and those musicians you mentioned. And with Craig Northey being a BC guy, is he as much of a champion for the Port Moody music scene as you are for Kingston? Do you guys have like a rivalry of my hometown music scene could beat up your hometown music scene going on?
There's a little bit of that sometimes. Yeah, he is a Port Moody guy. And living in North Van, they have a great little scene out there. And the odds are still very much active. And Craig has a full-time job doing music for TV. He does Tall Boys and Corner Gas.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's done all the music for that stuff. He's doing the Corner Gas cartoon and Tall Boys. And he takes comedy tours back when people would go on tour. Kids in the Hall or Mr. Show, Bob and David. He'd go out as the musical interludes.
Yeah, what's the Kids in the Hall connection? Because you mentioned Bruce McCullough earlier, and I know Dave Foley was on one of the albums as well. What's the connection there?
I don't know. Those guys have a hard job. It's like what we do, and if you're in a group like Kids in the Hall, it is a great collaboration. It's much more like what we do. But I've always thought being a stand-up comedian of any kind, getting up on stage without a wall of amplifiers or a guitar to bat away beer glasses, that would be a tough gig. Hockey players are kind of the same. There's always this bond between musicians and athletes, I think, because they recognize it in each other that there's a similarity. Yeah, I don't know. I've known those guys. I've known those guys for years, the Kids in the Hall guys, and Craig has worked with them a lot over the years. So in the instance of the Foley, he had said to Craig, "Oh, she's beautiful, but when her beauty fades, she'll be lonely." And Craig just thought that's a gem. He wrote it down, and then when it came time to write a song, we were talking about what we were going to write about a rose growing up in a bed of weeds or something. And he said, "Oh, I've got a line for this. We've got a chorus." So, but I've got to credit him.
There's a weird kinship in that way of writing comedy and writing music where it hinges on those perfect arrangements of words, those perfect lines that really drive it home in just the right way.
Yeah. And you want to get it right, but you also have to let it go at a certain point. Like perfection is the enemy of progress, I guess, as someone said. So at a certain point, you get it as right as you can and then put it out there and move on. It's what you've got to do. I've always been that way about working with the HIP Strippers Union, that it's a bit of a warts and all approach. This is what it is. In the time period given to us, this is the best I could do. Sorry.
You mentioned going out on tour, both, comedians and bands. With the timing of this new album coming out, obviously that's not something that you can do in the immediate future, but once the world...
Perfectly timed by me, I would say.
Was that an active decision in a world where restrictions get lifted? Are there any plans to take the new Strippers Union album?
I think as Bob Ross would call it, it's a happy accident. Yeah, the idea of being on the road, touring, I feel like I've kind of done that. I'm not averse to playing shows, but it's hard to make shows pay unless you are on the road, so it's a bit of a conundrum. And it's one I don't really have to think about right now because I don't know when that's coming back. It's going to be a little longer than people think,
and
I think.
Longer than we would like, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, it's already been too long, but I kind of feel like we're not quite at the halfway point, but we'll see.
We'll see. Well, Rob, we're going to play a track from the album. We're going to play Too Close to the Truth. Is there anything you'd like to say about the track before we play it?
No, I had a great time sitting exactly where I'm sitting right now, crafting that track, and I played it for Craig, and he was like, I love this song. Let's do it. And we sat around and hammered out lyrics, and he sang it sitting right here in this seat. And we ended up replacing the bass and drums, but my drum machine is still there to start and finish the track. And everything else was done right here. It was a gas. It was fun to do.
Thank you for listening to Kingston Live. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. For more great Kingston music, check out the Kingston Live playlist on Spotify. You can also hear our sister show, Kingston Live, on air on Amherst Island Radio 92.1 FM and CFRC 101.9 FM.
Let's go back to, you mentioned working with Boris, working with Cassador. You've been busy not only with Strippers Union, but you've also been working with some great Kingston bands. You worked with Cassador on Brood and Bloom. You worked with The Wilderness on their most recent album. What was that like? We're flexing that muscle in that role as more of a producer versus being the creator in a musical sense.
It was a new role, I guess. I'd done it a few times with bands, but I'd never really stepped in and done a full album with someone. But those guys are fantastic, The Wilderness. I really love them. I thought at the end of it, I will never see them again. They've had enough of me, but they asked me to do their next one. So I'm slated to go in and do that this spring with them.
We talked to them last fall, and that was not what they said. They had a great time working with you.
Yeah, I really enjoy them. They're a great group of guys and good songs, really good songs. There are a few really special things happening there, and I just want it to be as good as it can for them.
That's something I wanted to get into as well. Rob, as a lifelong Kingstonian and fan, I've always wanted to ask you about your connection to the community, because I feel like you and your bandmates and other people from Kingston, like Sarah Harmer, who, had success, they didn't just be successful and disappear. You're not only visible in the community, but you're involved in the community. What's the motivation for that?
I've always felt kind of privileged to live in Kingston. I mean, what do I know? Maybe it's the worst city in the world. I don't know. I was born here. It's an accident of birth. But, I walked Earl Street every day of my life to go to Winston Churchill School and then KCVI. And then I went to Queens. And then I ended up buying a house on halfway between my high school and my public school on the same street I walked every day. And I still walk it every day with my dogs. And I don't know. I just love my neighborhood. I love the city. And if you're wherever it is you choose to live, you try and make it a better place. I'm not a super spiritual guy. I'm definitely not a religious guy. I'm not an afterlife guy. So what's it about? And for me, it's about trying to make this life as good as it can be. And not just for you, you get your paycheck, you buy some nice sheets with a high thread count or whatever it is, throw pillows. At a certain point, it's like, I got it pretty good. What can I do now to make things better? And I think you just kind of have to spread it around a bit. It's a good community. It's a very interesting city. It's a diverse city. You could live here and not see all it has to offer. It is a strange and wild and wonderful place.
Since the early days of the hip, how has the music scene changed in your eyes over the years?
Oh, God. It's changing all the time. When we started out in the hip and even before the hip, it was a purely cover scene. It was tribute bands. No one wanted to hear original music. And, I think that's changed a lot. There was certainly a period in the 80s where every bar in town had at least one night a week of live music. And they'd cram them into some corner and move a couple of tables to put a band in. And it wasn't ideal. You have to be devoted to live music to really pull it off. If you're a bar owner or a devotee, I think it's a tough situation now. It's become more like, we used to hear about what it was like in LA and New York in the 70s and 80s, where it was a sort of a pay-to-play situation. It cost you money to get your band out there and expose your band to people. And it's becoming like that, I think, for young bands. It's harder and harder to make money. And the only way you can make money is playing live. But the deals I cut for the hip when when we first started booking shows, I did all the bookings. And it was pretty simple. It was a pretty basic operation. Everyone gets a $50 bill at the end of the night. PA and lights are covered, and we drink for free. It was a pretty basic deal. $250, drink for free, you cover the expenses. And most bands would kill to get a deal like that now. You know?
Especially all these years later.
Yeah, it's 35 years later, and it's worse than it was.
I would love to hear your comments on the way the music industry is changing with payments. All of these artists selling the rights to their music catalogs, like Neil Young, members of wow, my brain stopped working for a second there. Members of Fleetwood Mac. That's who I was going to say.
David Bowie did it years ago.
Yeah. Even Bob Rock just sold his producer rights to Metallica's The Black Album. How do you feel about that almost commoditization of music in a way?
I have pretty mixed feelings about it, but it is a commodity and there's no way around it. And for many generations, musicians were amongst the dumbest people on the planet. Every generation's musicians got ripped off in exactly the same way. So if they're starting to figure it out, that's good. I worry about the state of the industry overall when everything is designed for the listener's convenience and the middleman and the producer of the content is, well, I mean, they were always the last to get paid, but now they almost don't get paid. You know, the whole advent of streaming and start going back to Napster and everything else. And, you know, I can bitch and moan about it. I may as well piss into the wind because it's the way it is. It's not going to change. So you have to figure out how to move forward. So,
yeah.
What do you do?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's not like the musicians are in control of any of it. All they're in control of is whether their music is any good. That's all you can control. So
I guess on a slightly more positive note of that, it's been interesting to see a number of musicians start to try to take control over the situation that, you know, COVID has put us in. Things like more and more musicians joining platforms like Patreon, the monthly subscription service, to hear different variations, different takes, different progress in their albums. I would love to hear your thoughts on that as a development in the music industry.
And I think that there's a generation, maybe two generations behind us, my son's generation, that are much more tech savvy. You know, they grew up plugged into the wall and phone in hand and multiple screens, and they're figuring all this out. I think they're probably growing new internal organs as well, like through evolution, but they seem to be charting a path forward. I don't think they have it figured out, but they're on it, they're working it. And I think it's pretty interesting. It's interesting to watch. It's way beyond me. I'm like, what are you doing? Patreon? What? So I'm learning stuff every day from my son, who's all over this. So I think it's a good thing, you know. Musicians have always kind of gotten the fuzzy end of the lollipop, and I don't expect that's going to change unless they do something about it. So I'm glad to see them, young musicians, taking charge that way. I do think it's unfortunate. Obviously, it's necessary that musicians now need to be, you know, it's not enough to play your instrument and write songs. You have to be able to record, you know, produce your records. You have to be able to promote your records. You have to be tech savvy in terms of getting it out there and working the platforms, writing grant applications, all this. It's a little ridiculous. Who's got the time to pick up the guitar and write a song anymore? So,
well, the crazy thing is some of them can do it too. I mean, it's a lot of work, and people have to wear a lot of hats these days, but you do see people who are able to pull it off amazingly.
Yeah, and kudos to them. I sometimes feel like maybe the best of the lot go undiscovered because it's now so many things that required to move a project forward that if you're if you're really tech savvy and you can do great home recordings, you might be able to move forward with a boatload of shit. Whereas someone who doesn't have those technological advances or advantages, maybe stuck at home with a diamond mine, but maybe it's always been thus.
Going back to the reference of just Kingston having so many things to discover, so much almost hidden culture in this city, it seems like an unspoken Kingston rite of passage to run into you at Classic Video. So when you aren't recording, when you aren't producing, when you aren't writing new music, and you got some downtime, what have you been watching lately? Do you consider yourself a movie buff or a TV buff?
Yes. I was raised by a television set. My
Weren't we
parents,
all?
Yeah, I was the third of three. My parents were not so on top of the job. If I wasn't on my bike at 7 o'clock in the morning, coming home at 9 o'clock at night, I was parked in front of the television set. So, yeah, I'm like Jim Carrey and Cable Guy, raised by TV. So yeah, lately I've just binge watched Brockmire, which I'm crazy about. I absolutely love it. I don't know if you know the series.
I just started it. I'm a huge Hank Azaria fan.
Yeah, it's crazy good. It's really dark and offside and extremely funny. And before that, I binge watched Ted Lasso, another kind of sports character, extremely funny series. A little on the other side, he's a super sweet guy. He's so sweet that it's heart melting. He's a very sweet guy in a dark world, and Brockmire is a very dark guy in an otherwise sweet world. So,
the duality of man.
Yeah, I love it. I'm all over. I'm running out of things. I'm always looking for suggestions if you got one. So
I've been looking for more people to start watching Servant on Apple TV Plus.
Oh yeah, all over it.
Yeah. Oh, we need to talk theories, man. I am obsessed with that show right now.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. And I've been watching Your Honor, which has its season finale on this week. So yeah, it's getting mixed reviews. I'm loving it. I think it's really good. Well done. Bryan Cranston's great. So,
getting back to Classic Video, Rob, what's your relationship with fans? Because I'll talk to friends of mine, from outside of Kingston, and it blows their mind when I'll mention that, yeah, you'll just see members of the Hip just downtown. They're just hanging around. Nobody bothers them. Is that just my perception, or are people generally respectful out on the street?
Respectful? No. Definitely. I was walking down Princess Street, and there was a homeless guy sitting in front of McDonald's, and he looked up at me and he said, "Hey, Bobby, putting on a little weight, eh?" Well, fuck you. So, no, mostly people are really great. They leave you alone, or if you were a school teacher or a bus driver or whatever, and people came up and said, I think you do a great job. I really like the work you do. You would be so grateful. It would buoy your day. And I get that on a regular basis. People come up and tell me what the work meant to them or means to them. Occasionally they come up and tell you that you're a load of crap or whatever, and that's fine. You take the good with the bad, and that's how it is. I've always been a big believer in hide in plain sight. That if you're just completely available, people get tired of it. So they'll get bored of you and leave you alone. Mostly it works. So.
Well, that may be a good point to end it, unless either of you have anything else you want to talk about.
That's it for me.
Okay.
I'm good. I hope you got something that you can salvage out of all of it.
No, that was great. Rob, thank you so much for talking to us. This was great.
Yeah, this was a great time. This is awesome.
That was a pleasure, guys. Thanks a lot.
This has been Kingston Live. We encourage you to rate us on your listening platform of choice and subscribe where possible. Kingston Live was produced in Kingston at Titan Sound, hosted by Riley Jabor and John Sanfilippo, writing and research by Peter Sanfilippo, voiceovers by John Sanfilippo and Eilish Sullivan, promotional assistance by Jackson Coulter and Reed Cunningham, executive producer Rob Howard. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@kingstonlive.ca.